Welcome everybody to a new CIRF report, this one for November 14th through the 20th. We are headed to Thanksgiving, but that will be in the next CIRF report. So there is so much astrology, I'm not even going to mention the types of stuff that we have, T-squares, grand trines, etc. I'm going to do things a little bit differently because the I-Ching highlights exactly what the astrology is showing, in that there is so much going on day by day that I think the I-Ching report or the I-Ching reading will give us the best advice in this case overall, as an overall picture. It's going to be hard to nail down just one little meme for the whole week because the energy does shift and change day by day. And so in the nuts and bolts of this whole summary slide, we can see that by triangulating the dream bot, the collective unconscious, the I-Ching reading 60, hexagram 60, and the astrology with all its T-squares and grand trines and Mars going into Scorpio and all the Venus aspects and all the Uranus aspects, what we're looking at is the main theme is timing and placement on limits and power. I'm saying that kind of slow because I want to let it sink in. I want to let it sink in a lot. There's going to be times to pull back this week, times to push forward. And it's not going to be the same for everyone. It's going to be a little bit different. And what I can do is nail down each day's astrology and let you decide if that is, compare that to your calendar or whatever, and see whether or not your intuition says if that's a limit day or a go day. And if this makes no sense to you so far, don't worry. Hopefully the I-Ching, I'm going to start with the I-Ching, and hopefully that will make everything clear. So I'm going to get that set up, and here we go. All right, the I-Ching reading, we cast 3 coins for each period, and we do that 6 times, and we come up with a hexagram. 2 trigrams, this one, water over lake, which is hexagram 60. This is probably not what most people are thinking about limitation, but it's articulating limitation, almost in the sense of, and in reality, as I ponder this hexagram in preparation for the CIRF, I think of just about every type of use of the word limitation actually applies here. You might get limited. You might have to impose limitation. You might feel limited. And then in the other sense of the words, like spending limitations or exuberant limitations, so addiction kind of things, making sure you stop when you should be stopping. But the articulation part of this indicates that it's some sort of relational issue, and there is a lot of relationship in the astrology. Almost there's some growth areas, but there's some conflicted obstacle areas in the Venus aspects. We're going to look at all that in the astrology. But anyway, the other thing that I missed here is look at how many change lines there are on this hexagram. This is unprecedented. So, but think of this, or realize this, that as soon as we look at what these change lines produce, it produces the same type of suggestion in the resulting hexagram. It is incredible. But first, let's talk about what this hexagram is all about. I'm going to be reading quite a bit because we have 5 I-Ching lines, 5 of these lines to read out. And I'm just going to pick and choose a little bit of this to read. It's going to be a lot of reading, and I apologize. But it's really important. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. So water over lake, or hexagram 60. The lake is something limited. Basically, water is inexhaustible, but the lake itself, the lake bed, has a limit as to how much water it can put in it. In human life, too, the individual achieves significance through discrimination and setting of limits. To become strong, a man's life needs the limits ordained by duty and voluntarily accepted. In other words, we need to accept our limitations. The individual attains significance as a free spirit only by surrounding himself or herself with these limitations and by determining for himself what his duty is. So acting with purpose. All right, I'm going to go through the hexagram lines. It's basically every line except 4. So line number 1, I'm going to read the whole thing here. Often a man who would like to undertake something finds himself confronted by insurmountable limitations. Then he must know where to stop. If he rightly understands this and does not go beyond the limits set for him, he accumulates an energy that enables him, when the proper time comes, to act with great force. Discretion is of prime importance in preparing the way for momentous things. Discretion is the key here. Discretion is of prime importance in preparing the way for momentous occasions. So line number 1 basically says use discretion. Don't go too far. Line 2, when the time for action has come, the moment must be quickly seized. So you can already see that the hexagram, they wanted us to see that this is not just a time of limiting yourself. This is a time of seeing your opportunities as well. And when the opportunity is there, boom, you are Johnny on the spot. Quickly get in there and get the job done. Seizing opportunities. All right, line 3. If an individual is bent only on pleasures and enjoyment, it is easy for him to lose his sense of the limits that are necessary. If he gives himself over to extravagance, he will have to suffer the consequences with accompanying regret. This is mainly due to the addictive cycle, the dopamine reward system. Don't get caught in that because you're going to lose your sense of when to limit yourself. All right, line 5. The limitation must be carried out in the right way if it is to be effective. If we seek to impose restrictions on others only while evading them ourselves, these restrictions will always be resented and will provoke resistance. So it's almost like we need to be negotiating limitations or just setting boundaries, as somewhat as we talked before in a couple other CIRF reports. Line 6. If one is too severe in setting up restrictions, people will not endure them. These last 2 lines have everything to do with relationships. And we are going to get into some heavy relationship issues in the CIRF report. But let's talk about the solution here. And this is, so line 60 with these 5 change lines moves into hexagram 52. This is called keeping still. We've actually been through this one recently, so it should be no difference here. Moving slowly, we can achieve more. Unhurried ride provides an opportunity not only to reach a distant goal without riding a horse to death or breaking the wagon, but also allows much to see and learn. This, my friends, is saying the exact same thing as 60 in terms of what we need to be behaving with, what we need to be doing. In other words, it says the hexagram signifies the end and the beginning of all movement. When a man has thus become calm, he may turn to the outside world. He no longer sees in it the struggle and tumult of individual beings, and therefore he has the true peace of mind which is needed for understanding the great laws of the universe and for acting in harmony with them. Whoever acts from these deep levels makes no mistakes. That's the key. That is the solution, the ultimate solution. Finding the deep, calm space within, that's otherwise known as intuition, and knowing when to proceed, knowing when to restrict yourself, and having the confidence to do either one at the right time. All right. If that wasn't enough, let's talk about the astrology And first, I guess I could scroll all the way up and you can see the aspects lines. We have a couple new aspects coming into view, and instead of talking about them here, I'll just go to the astrology. Not really sure why I even brought that one up, but this is the astrology at the time of this CIRF report. I'm going to get the highlighter out, and you can already see that we have ourselves a T-square. And this T-square is centered around the moon. Without the moon here, we're not going to have a T-square. And because the moon whips around so fast, this T-square will be gone by midday on Thursday, the 14th. But it's worth talking about here because it is a trap. It's a trap relationally. That's with Venus and Neptune. Neptune is dreamy and in fantasy and creating obstacles maybe that don't even exist. And then the moon is our emotional response. So emotions works really well with the relationships because you really can't really have relationships without emotion. I mean, theoretically you could, but indifference is not really any sort of bonding. In order to bond, you need to have emotions, moon, and the different types of people in your life. All right, so why is this a T-square, and what does that mean for us? It means that there could be an imagination or fantasy that creates obstacles in the relationship, and then you're learning how to balance those emotional reactions with the relationship. Venus also represents money and finance. So in that case, you might have dreams of wanting more, or maybe you have fantasy of having too much money, and so you go spend it all. This is what we're talking about in this whole week, is that even though this T-square ends by Tuesday midday, is setting limitations. And that includes finance as well. All right, the other thing that I want to point out that's starting is Mars oppose Uranus. And this one we covered in the last CIRF report. It's you really can't contain this change. You're yang, you're wanting to move and get things done, but Uranus really asks you to adapt. And Mars doesn't really have a lot of adaptation in it. It just has get it done in it. And so it's really hard to contain this kind of conflict that's going to ensue, or is ensuing some sort of change. Okay. Now let's get into some other aspects that are we're just now entering. We're starting with Uranus trine Jupiter, and that is right here. That one is just freshly starting. That's going to be it's going to go through this entire week, but it's going to end up being with us all throughout the rest of November. This is a really positive aspect because the change is bountiful, it's optimistic, it's expansive. Okay, so it's kind of it's a dampening effect on what I just said. So your Mars now may have an ability to carry out something in that new environment that's being changed by Uranus. I already talked about the T-square. We also have Venus, which has some growth opportunities in it. We talked about sort of a trap. The trap in the relationship is fantasy and emotional reaction. Too much emotional reaction from the fantasies that might be causing the relationships to disrupt. But Venus also has a lot of other aspects to it. And here pretty soon on the 14th, I might as well talk about it now. Venus is going to semi-sextile Saturn and semi-sextile Mercury. And so in this thing, the semi-sextile is all about growth opportunities. And of course, with Venus being either relationships or finance-ish, you've got some other sort of memes in there, but mainly relationships. And Saturn says this is the way things should be. But you have opportunity to maybe make it right with rules and boundaries. But Venus also semi-sextiles Mercury. So communication has an opportunity to grow here. In other words, what we're asking you to do, instead of staying in this T-square of fantasy in relationships, is get out in the real world with your relationships. Say it like it is. Saturn has everything to do with the boundaries and limitations that we talked about in the I-Ching reading. And then Mercury has everything to do with the articulation that we talked about. And so communicate your boundaries has everything to do with the growth that's available here with Venus. The other opportunities that we have, well, let's zoom over to the 14th, and I can show you a little bit more. We're going to start with 7:30 in the morning. We're getting there fairly quickly. I passed it already. Nope. There we go. That's close enough. That's 8:30. This is all standard time. And on the 14th, a new opportunity is dawning with the sun. The sun is sextile to Pluto, and Pluto wants to, Pluto being down here, Pluto being the destroyer, starting fresh, starting new, destroying the old, starting the new. Identity. So identity could be collapsing and restarting. There's an opportunity there to do that. You can enforce that, and by that I mean we could be talking about ego. We could be talking about new plans, what we want to be, our life purpose. Even this is a very big opportunity to establish hidden power. That's what Pluto is. It's the hidden power in us. We also have an opportunity with Mercury sextile Saturn. And in that opportunity, we're communicating the way things should be. We're going right back to that whole Venus thing, communicating our boundaries, communicating, articulating things, thinking about the rules and structure. All right, if that wasn't enough, it really does get very complex in here. And I want to just keep it simple. I'm going to move to Tuesday, and what you're going to see is a different T-square. This is the 15th of November, and I forgot to write down the time on which to stop this train, but hopefully we'll see it. There we see it. Now, this is at middle of the night, but you can see Moon oppose Jupiter, and Jupiter squares to Chiron, Chiron to the Moon. And in this case, we're getting really optimistic about who we can help. And we might have dreams about, since this is at night, this is going to last, all through the next day, though. So on Friday, Friday, 15 November, we're going to have this tendency to probably overdo our help, or maybe pour too much of ourselves into helping others, if that makes sense. Some people think that just helping others is a good thing, but not when you're draining your own resources. And that's exactly what you're going to see on Friday. On Friday is a time to pull back for most people. And again, this whole limitation thing and boundary articulation has to be from your intuition. It can't be a collective thing, but I'm saying that probably most people are going to be best to pull back on Friday because of this T-square and the optimism around, or over-optimism about how much you can put out and help and value others. Okay, that's it for that one. And then the Saturday, guess what? Now everything shifts, and we're going to get rejuvenated with some grand water trine. We have 2 days of grand trines, and the first day is going to be on the 16th. And we're going to start at about 4 a.m. All right, that should be good. There you can see it. We've got Neptune, Moon conjunct with North Node. And North Node is where we're headed. Kind of our fate in the world. Our life purpose, if you will. This is emotional response to that life purpose. This gives us an opportunity, if you don't know your life purpose, to really have an opportunity to imagine it. This is Neptune, and fantasize about that life purpose. And then over here is Mercury. Holy cow, we have the opportunity to think rationally about what we're fantasizing or imagining about where we're headed. And we have the benefit of having the emotional response with it. So this is a grand water trine, meaning that it's going to be somewhat emotional, but it's going to be psychic. And it's going to be very creative. Water is known to be very creative. So on Saturday, time to rejuvenate. That is to get your resources back from the heavy week, especially with the last 2 days of T-squares. And then think about where I'm headed in life. Am I on the right life path? Then at 6 a.m. the next day, this is Sunday now, on the 17th, we have another grand trine, a different one. This one was with the Sun and Chiron. And that should be good. And you can see that playing out here. You have the Sun, Moon, Chiron, all in another grand trine. Now this one's not a grand water trine, but 2 of the figures here are in water signs. Chiron is in Aries in the fire sign, so we got a little bit of fire, a little bit of water. They don't really mix all that well. They kind of cancel each other out. But ignore the elements. You still have a lot of trines, and the trines are easy energy. Your identity, what do we talk about on Saturday? Chance to figure out your life path. Well, here we are again. Ego has, you can pass the emotions off to ego, and ego can now know what his or her life path is all about. And lo and behold, I've lost my, there we go. Got it back a little bit. Sorry about that. Hold on. All right, now on Monday, there's nothing really new. There are a lot of aspects. There's some inconjuncts in there that are starting. But I'm going to bypass all that. And we're going to go straight to Tuesday, November 19th at 2:30 p.m. That's good. We passed it. Now, as it's making its way back. There we go. What we have here is a couple different things. Well, first of all, an hour earlier than this, at 1:30 p.m., 1:30 a.m. on the 19th, on Monday. I'm sorry, Tuesday. On Tuesday next week, Mars is going to go into Scorpio. And so you can see that Mars has just entered there. He's still in an opposition to Uranus. Uranus still in a trine to Jupiter. So all that's still the same. But now Mars being in Scorpio, Mars is returning home. Mars is one of the rulers of Scorpio. And that's that hidden power. You know, Scorpio can kind of be under the rock and be in the dark. And so Mars, just loving that inner power. It's the inner hidden power that's going to be coming to manifest in the middle part of next week. Sense of inner power, but also expansive emotions during change. That's the Jupiter trine Uranus oppose Mars. Okay, a lot going on here. But if there's a time to seize the day, it's going to be Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. On Wednesday, then, we have lots of trines. We already have lots of trines on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we still have those trines. Just a couple of squares And three, we're going to turn that one opposition into three other oppositions. So just a lot going in the sky. It's total chaos. How do you know if it's time to leap on a project or starting to hold back? You have to use your intuition. That's the bottom line here. Let's get straight to this summary slide. It's so important for everybody to know that you're not on your own this week. It's just individualized on what's right for you and what's right for the collective. The biggest influence and the solution, well, let's talk about the influence. There's limits here. Speed limit 55. I can't drive 55. There's the astrology we talked about. It's just all about limits. Yeah, there's not a lot of Saturn in there. I don't think I mentioned Saturn once. But with the squares, with the alignments, the T-squares, these are potential hazard signs. And then with Mars going into Scorpio, he's got his power back and the inner power and the sense of hidden confidence. And applying that power at the right time is absolutely critical. So what's the solution? Find the quiet within. Find your intuition. I could go off for another half hour on talking about what some methods of getting intuition. It's an inner knowing. Intuition doesn't have to use the rational mind to figure it out. Rational mind constricts you to what it knows or what it thinks it knows. Rationalization is only limited to the knowledge that we have right now. Intuition doesn't bound us. Intuition may not be rational, but in the terms of accuracy, and especially with all this different energetic forces, intuition is the key. So find the quiet within, use discretion and moderation in all things, especially in extravagance. So when you're spending, limit your spending. I'm not saying don't spend anything. I'm saying limit it when it's time to limit it. What's interesting is Angie and I, at the same day, yesterday, found that same energy. We were already deciding together before I was looking at the astrology and the CIRF to start limiting our expenditures. So the energy is clearly still there. And set boundaries with others as appropriate. Shore up the boundaries that have been ignored and relegated to, well, I'll just do that later, or I will just repress my emotion and wait for them to do it again. No, set your boundaries now. Don't wait on those. And then when the time is right, pounce on your opportunities. Okay. Very important not to just sit back and stay stagnant if the opportunity represents itself. But you can't be using your rational mind to decide, because rational is slower. Intuition is an immediate knowing. Okay. I'm not talking about impulsivity. If you have any questions on this, there's a very fine line between impulsivity and an intuitive knowing about pouncing on an opportunity. And then, of course, rationalization has to balance both sides, pros and cons. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's slower. And the I-Ching was very clear. Don't take that time to decide on your opportunities. You'll miss your opportunities. It'll bring misfortune. Okay. All right. I hope that was clear. If you have any questions, just ask below. I'll be more than happy to answer all your questions. All right. Take care, everybody. And we'll see you next time. Stay warm.